All right, we are beginning week 5 today. All right, so the first 4 weeks we covered chapters 1 to 7. We are going to pick it up a little bit this week. You may consider that bad news, good news, whatever. But much of the material that we'll cover this week is either fairly simplistic, all right, or we've started covering it already. Like chapter 9 is on images. There's not a lot in there that we haven't already covered as far as images go, but we'll talk about some of that stuff. So today I'm actually going to lecture on 3 chapters. It's going to take a while. All right. So we're going to do chapter 8 last. So I'm going to do 9, take a break, 10, take a break, and then we'll go back and do 8. Tomorrow, I don't know if you've ever heard of a package like this, but there is a package out there that was made by some of the people from Twitter that's called Twitter Bootstrap. And we're going to create something tomorrow that's going to be, for lack of better words, it's going to look like this. All right, it doesn't look like that much, but what you'll see is when we bring it up here, it's responsive. All right, and that's what we're going to be going over in chapter 8, is talking about responsive design. All right, so again, what we will end up doing tomorrow is you're going to get in here and get on the system right away, get into your editor of choice, because we're going to write Bootstrap for the entire period. All right. Wednesday, I'm going to give you the tests back. They were very interesting, so I'm trying to figure out right now how to grade them. All right. Some of you, for lack of better words, kind of amazed me at how well you did. Other people seem to have struggled. All right. So we will go over that, like I said, all period on Wednesday. All right. But the first thing is you'll have a written test on chapter 8. Then Thursday, we'll have a written test on chapter 9. Then we'll go over the shape up for chapters 8 to 10. Friday, there will be a written test on chapter 10 and then lab. So if you notice, there's no test this week. There's no hands-on test. All right. Then the following week, that Monday, so a week from today, we're going to go over chapters 11 and 12. 11 is on forms. All right. And if you remember, I created a form for you for the Leave Me at Home site. Well, hopefully by the end of that period, on Monday, you'll understand all of the components that are in there, and you'd be able to go in using your own components or using CSS, and you'd be able to understand what's in that form. All right. Probably. All right. And again, I was very, very, interested in looking at your test, because everybody's going to get the 5 points for the testimonials page, because I said in there, basically design it any way you want. And people did. And they were all, you guys were all over the board, which is fine. Probably for your next actual hands-on test, which will be a week from Thursday, all right, I'll probably tell you to redesign that form. And I will tell you a few things that I want on it, but then I'll say, you design it the way that you think it should look. Again, part of my mindset with that is that you are starting to do things in your own way. I think I've said this before. I don't want 12 people in here that are doing everything lockstep. Do it like this, do it like this, do it like this, do it like this. All right. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. All right. So again, a week from today, we'll go over the lecture for chapters 11 and 12. Then on Tuesday, or so a week from tomorrow, we'll go over the shape up for 11 and 12. Probably it'll take an hour to 2 hours. Then lab. Then notice written tests for chapters 11 and 12. Yeah, they're on the same day. All right. We will always have reviews before those. Then lab the rest of the period. A week from Thursday, your hands-on test number 4 will be that day. We will have a review before that. A week from this Friday, the 5th, you may remember this from the beginning of the semester. You may not. My daughter's getting married. I will not be here that day. All right. I actually thought of coming for my morning class. I shouldn't have said that to my wife. All right. No, because it's like you have no choice. You are taking off the entire day. All right. So I'm taking off the entire day. All right. Then in 2 weeks, and you can run this off if you want copies. I'll put it out there on the system. I'll probably just end up emailing it to all of you. But 2 weeks from now, then we're going to do the same kind of thing, but with chapters 13 and 14. All right? That's it as far as what's covered from this book. There are really like 18 or 19 chapters, but the last 5 or 6 chapters, they're basically the same thing that's in the next book. You understand what I'm saying? So probably what we'll do is when we come back after the midterm, before we start on the other book, I'll probably spend a period or so and just very quickly cover, say, this is what we're going to be covering for the next 8 weeks. All right? Now, again, this is way in the future, but notice October 15th through the 19th. On that Friday, before that, so 14, 13, the 12th, I guess that would be, on that Friday, I'm going to hand you out the midterm. All right? You get an entire week plus to work on it. So it'll be handed out Friday the 12th. It'll be due Monday the 22nd. You will have the entire week to work on that midterm. So as you can imagine, it's going to be fairly extensive. Anything that is in chapters 1 through 14 is fair game, and it's a hands-on. Okay, but you get the stuff, and you get all class period. You will get literally, you will get all day Monday, all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday, all day Thursday, all day Friday to work on it. So in other words, if you do get here at 8 and you stay till 12, that'd be 20 hours. You take off the 10 minutes per day, that's still 19 and a half hours. So you are going to get plenty of time to work on it. Then on that Monday, that's when we will literally start to get into JavaScript. All right? And actually, either today or tomorrow, I'm going to show you the kind of thing we're going to be doing. You might look at it and you're going to go, I don't have a flipping clue as to what any of this does. That's to be expected. All right, so don't worry about that. Especially if you've never done any programming at all, it's to be expected. One thing that we're going to do when we go into JavaScript, and I've done this before, and I pretty much have had success with it, is we're going to, every time we go into a new chapter, we're going to have a running program, and we're going to add to it. So when we first start, it's going to be unbelievably simplistic. By the time we get done, you're going to have a website, and that website will have pages that will bring up JavaScript and that will bring up jQuery. All right? They will use the DOM, which is the document object model. They will use, like I said, jQuery. They will use validation, etc. So you'll start to hopefully really understand that stuff. All right? When we get towards the end of that, so I don't know, sometime around the beginning of December, you'll have a second midterm. And that'll all be basically, it'll be probably taking the first site that you created and adding JavaScript and jQuery to it. All right? Just so you have some kind of an idea as to what's ahead here. Like I said, I'll email this to all of you by the end of class. All right? So I'm going to go into the book here. And instead of going into chapter 8, I'm going to jump into chapter 9. So I'm going to move up to page 319 here. And you'll notice on page around there, how's that? There we go. We are going into the second section of the book, and it's called Page Layout and Responsive Web Design. Now, put this in perspective and to keep it simple, you know most everything you have to know to design web pages. This second section, all right, this second section that's in here, this is more about refining what you already know. So in other words, you can kind of look at it this way. All right, I'm a sports guy. Never been all that great, but I've always loved sports. All right, but you kind of were in the minor leagues in chapters 1 through 8, and now you're up to the majors. You're playing with the big guys and the big gals. All right, so that's what we'll be doing in here. So as it says, in Chapter 9, you'll learn how to use flexible box layout to lay out the element of a page in rows and columns. In Chapter 10, all right, as it says, hold on a second. Just want to make sure that the page numbers are really, really different from what you've got here as opposed to what's in my book. All right, that's the reason that it's so funky right now. All right. Okay. That's why. Because I brought the wrong version of the book. I've got the 3rd edition here. I got to jump back to my office and grab the 4th edition. It's totally different. All right. So I've got it, but I've got it in my office. Well, I left it at home, but that's fine. We're going on anyway. All right. Is this what you have here for your Chapter 9? I'm asking you. Is this what you have on page 323 of your book? Okay. All right. Okay. So they mention here, what we learned earlier in this text is we talked about the box model. Okay? We've talked about how to use CSS. You have seen, you have gone through exercises, you have gone through a hands-on test where you created both 2-page column layouts and 3-page column layouts. All right. In addition, you've learned how to float, for example, text to the left or to the right of images. So we've looked at that stuff already. All right. Now, they say here CSS3, which is the latest version of CSS, has introduced 2 new features that can be used for page layout. All right. So as it says right here, the main one is something that's called Flexbox. And that's what we're going to look at first. Just so you're aware of this, one of the reasons Flexbox was even created is, by and large, developers hate floating. Float left, float right, they just don't like it. It doesn't make sense why sometimes you have to float stuff to the right to get it there, and why other times you have to float it to the left. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's one of the reasons that Flexbox was created. I think I've mentioned this to you before, but CSS Tricks has got a really good article that's called A Complete Guide to Flexbox. All right. Do you have to read that for this class? No. Well, I don't remember if that was in your assignment or not. We're going to go over that later too. But if you go, I'd really like to understand this. That's a great place to start. W3 Schools has a section on Flexbox. It's not nearly as in-depth as this is. All right. So, as it says here, this is what we're going to do. Getting started with flexible box layout, how to set the different properties. and a responsive web page that uses Flexbox. What is driving all of this stuff is basically it's a concept that's known as mobile first. Okay? In the past, not very many years ago, but in the past, when people designed websites, they designed websites to be viewed on a desktop or a laptop computer, and that was about it. Today, that's not the way it is. I've given you statistics. We've talked about this a little bit, but more people today view, web pages using tablets and using their phones than they do using laptops and desktops. So in the past, mobile was kind of an afterthought. All right? Okay, and as an example, just so you understand, being from Wisconsin, I still get the Milwaukee Journal, and I get it online. Okay? And I sit there and read it, etc. But if let's say I go to the sports page here, and I decide, okay, as I'm looking through here, hopefully you agree with this, that's somewhat responsive, but it's not totally responsive. In other words, look at that. That's not responsive. Does that make sense to everybody when I say that? All right. Now, if I bring it up on my phone, it's going to be totally responsive. And the reason for that is you have two choices, basically, when you are deciding to work with responsiveness and have it work for a mobile device. You can either do what they did here, which is literally to have two versions of the website. One that is for laptop, desktop, bigger devices, and another one that's for mobile devices. All right. In fact, if I go out to that one, rather than it being jsonline.com, it's mjsonline.com, where the M is mobile. So what a lot of places have done that have websites is they decided we don't want to go back and redo a lot of stuff. We'll check to see what you're looking at our website in, and we'll either bring up the mobile version or the non-mobile version. So that's one way to handle it. The other way to handle it is this mobile first, which didn't show very well, but just so you know that's when you design for mobile first. You literally get the thing to work like in a phone. If you can get it to work in a phone, it's not a big stretch to get it to work on a bigger device. All right? When we get into Chapter 8 a little later today, what you're going to see in Chapter 8 is we're going to talk about responsiveness. All right? And that is, like I said, that's the ability to sit there and be able to do this. All right? And when you come in tomorrow and you start working on Bootstrap with me, that's a totally responsive framework. All right? Okay. Finally, they're going to go back, and I think it's the same San Joaquin Valley thing that they've been working on, but they're going to do that using Flexbox. All right. So, as it says, the next figure introduces you to the concepts you need to understand Flexbox. I don't normally like to go over the text, but you're going to have to at least have a fundamental understanding, all right, of some of these terms. You've got a flex container, and as it says, that flex container will contain one or more items. All right? So again, the whole thing with this is the idea that you want this to be responsive, and you want to write code that you will understand. You don't want to constantly be doing a float left, float right, clear fix, etc., if you can help it. All right. Now, that doesn't mean that totally, just because you use this, that floats go away. Typically, they're used in unison with one another. But again, many developers believe that as they either end up maintaining someone else's site, or if they create their own new stuff, you'll find very little floating and a lot more Flexbox. All right. So if we look at this, it's a CSS3 layout module. So in other words, it's fairly new. The newest version of CSS is CSS3. Now, one thing about this, I've shown you this before. I'm going to go out to caniuse.com, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in Flexbox. And you'll notice it's all green. Hopefully you all realize, we've talked about this before, that means it's supported by virtually every browser that's out there. The only ones that you may have some problems with, notice it says IE11. All right, so IE8 and IE9 is going to be problematic with this. Usually what IE does is it's smart enough that if it doesn't understand something, it just ignores it. All right, which is actually what you'd want to have happen in earlier versions of the browser. All right, so as it says, it can be used to develop page layouts that conform to different screen sizes. All right, and what you're going to see as we get more and more into this, when they talk about different screen sizes, is the fact that there are literally, there's going to be something that are going to be called breakpoints. So in other words, if you have, and it's done in pixels, yeah, not rems, but it's done in pixels. If you've got a pixel size that's between, for example, like let's say 368 pixels and 540 pixels, that might be for a mobile device. If it's between 540 pixels, or for a phone. If it's between 540 and 780, that might be for a tablet. All right, etc. And that's the kind of thing that we're going to be talking about. So as it says, a Flexbox, it's a container. And what does it hold? It holds Flex items. And as it says, they're laid out within the container along this main axis. All right. Yeah, there's pictures there. You might like the pictures better in W3 schools. I don't know. All right. And it says it's laid out depending on flex direction. They can be aligned along the main axis or along this cross axis. All right. So in other words, along the x-axis or along the y-axis. All right. This is not this class, this program. It's not math. People look at it. I don't know math. I mean, you have to have some kind of an understanding. All right. Hopefully all of you realize this. I mean, some of you have talked to me individually offline, and maybe you want to get into gaming or creating your own games or whatever. And that's almost entirely done with math. All right. It's not that you don't need to understand this, you do, but you end up working with math almost completely in there. All right. So as it says, width and height properties are still used to set the dimensions of the Flex container. If the width is not explicitly set, it will default in the container to 100%. In other words, it'll take up as much in there as it can possibly take up. All right. So the first thing they have is how to come in here and create your first invisible Flexbox. And notice in here some of the stuff we're going to be using. Display specifies the type of box that's going to be used. Flex, which is a block, or flex inline. All right. And then you can tell the direction. All right. It says possible values are row and column. Hopefully you understand. Row is horizontally across. Column is vertically up and down. All right. And if that confuses you, think of a spreadsheet. Most people in here have seen a spreadsheet. You've used Excel or something else. With Excel, the top thing that's up there is what? It's cell A1, all right? Which means it's column A, the first column, and row 1. It's the same type of principle here. So they show you how you can go and set this thing up. So how does it change? Well, guess what? As far as I know, that doesn't change at all. You know how to do this now. You should be able to go in and create something like that. All right. But notice it says CSS that uses Flexbox to display the menu vertically. All right. You say display flex and you say flex direction column. All right. As opposed to flex direction row. Now, again, you look at this, you go, that's fine, I get all that, but do we have to do it that way? No. We looked in the last chapter. If you remember, you learned in the last chapter we went over, chapter 7, I believe it was, how you could create something that looked very similar to that. All right? There are many, many web developers out there that are happy to use floating and the like, and they find using Flexbox to be confusing. So they don't want to use that. And it's not that you have to use it, but it was designed to make your life easier to use. Okay? All right. And again, I don't want to sit there and read this to you. Okay? It looks very similar to what we looked at in the last chapter. The main difference is these look a lot nicer. They look more like buttons than what we looked at in the last chapter. They've applied a little bit of CSS to them. All right? But it's just another way of doing the same thing. And again, one of the reasons it is being done is people just say, the way that we were doing it, it's too hard. All right? Now, I'm just going to tell you something just so you hear this. Tomorrow, as I mentioned, we're going to go in and we're going to look at a thing called Bootstrap. All right? You're going to learn how to create responsive websites. You'll all create one, if not two, if not three, by the end of the period. All right? The key to understanding Bootstrap is to realize, don't try to memorize anything. Nothing. Because they've got, this is where we're going to start tomorrow, is we're going to go out to getbootstrap.com. That's the site. And there's the documentation. All right? So if you want to know about layout, you click there and you start looking at that. All right? That's how you learn it. And more than anything else, it's a boatload of repetition. Okay? When you create your portfolio in here, I'm going to ask that you try to do it in Bootstrap. All right? Okay. So, how to set Flexbox properties, how to align them along the main axis. Again, notice this. There's just a lot of different ways that you can do this. The good news is, if you start looking at some of the stuff that's in there, all right, ideally at least, it makes sense. Justify content. All right, well, when you justify it, what happens? You're probably used to justifying text if you've ever written anything in Word. So everything always ends, the right hand, as you're typing, everything lines up. We've talked about justifying things in web pages before and some of the problems that makes. All right, if you've got a 2 or a 3 column layout and you're justifying text, what you're going to end up typically having happen is a lot of white space in your articles. So there's different ways that you can set this up. All right. There's the CSS for it. So again, all right, you start to look at that and you go, these all look the same. Okay. Well, it says there, the first one says justify content properties to set the space between. With that first one, all right, the space between each one is identical. So what you're starting to get into here, what you're starting to talk about is to try to make the site look as professional as possible. All right. You may have noticed that with working with the Leave Me at Home site. Some of you might have added padding or margin so that each one of the options that were in there, the home, the about, the services, the testimonial, and the contact, had the same amount of space between them. Some of the rest of you might not have done it at all. All right? And it maybe looks a little bit amateurish. All right? We're going to keep working on that. All right? So as it says, this justify content determines how they're aligned along the main axis. All right? When the items don't use all available space. So again, the idea, I can't say this to you too many times, is to try to make things look uniform. All right? That's really what we're moving towards. Most people, whether you realize it or not, you're used to uniformity. Okay? And what I mean is, you're used to going into a Microsoft product, for example, and you go in right away, the file will be on the left-hand side. If you go down to the bottom of file, there'll be exit. Or you'll see a picture up there or whatever, because that's the way that things are done. All right? So you can not only align along the horizontal axis, you can align along the vertical axis. All right? So again, I can't say this too many times. We are talking about trying to take existing site content and make it look as professional as possible. All right? And again, I don't want to sit there and read this stuff to you, but I would strongly suggest that you come in here and take a look at the examples that are in there. All right? If you don't, I believe I put all the actual code from the book out in Inside Rankin. If I did not, and again, I think I did, but if I did not, you can go out yourselves to Muroc.com and you can download all of the code for the book. There's no charge for it. Even if you never bought the book, they let everybody download it. So the reason I'm telling you that is, well, I don't want to type all that. You don't have to. All right? And they will have the examples in there for every chapter. You might find that helps you on your next test. I don't know. As it says, as you align items, it determines how they're aligned along the cross-axis. And you might look at that and go, well, this looks really, you're talking about making it look professional. It looks amateurish. No, you would still come in with your CSS and play with colors and stuff. But realize this is a black and white book. So they're using black, white, and gray to try to show you this stuff. All right. It says if the flex items within a flexible container are too wide to fit, they don't wrap to multiple lines. Instead, the sizes of the items are reduced as much as possible, and the content is wrapped within the flex item. That's really important. All right. What they're saying is, if you've said that something is going to take up 2 columns, and it really takes up 3, it'll take up 2, but rather than having it stretch horizontally, it'll stretch vertically. All right. And that's exactly what they're talking about here. That's usually what you're going to want to have happen. And that's what they're showing you right here. Now you might say, well, that looks bad. I mean, this looks bad, etc., etc. You still could go in there and play with that with some more CSS. The point is, notice you still have just a certain amount of area. All right? So rather than it stretching this way, it's stretching this way. All right. That's the key thing to realize. And again, as you go in and you're looking at this on different types of media, it becomes even more important. All right. I will tell you that if you've got a website, it may look fantastic on here, but if somebody brings that website up and they bring it up in their phone and stuff is just all over the place, they're going to probably leave the site. They're just going to think it doesn't look professional, and they'll go out to someone else's site. And as an example, Tom and I were talking a little bit this weekend, and he even said, is this eventually going to look nice on my phone? I said, yeah, that's the plan. All right. All right. When you use Flexbox, you can determine how space is allocated. All right. This is particularly useful for developing responsive sites. Again, there's so much stuff in here, it doesn't pay at all to come in here and say, well, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be able to memorize this stuff. Don't even try. All right? I'm not sure right now when you take your test how much, there's a pretty good chance. I have to talk to Evan to see how he's doing it. But there's a pretty good chance you'll have very little on your test in this chapter. Because when you sit there, if you're going to use Flexbox, basically to get it to work and to understand it, you have to lay it out first by hand. It has to start making some sense to you. All right, and then you have to basically start setting it up. You could spend the whole period just doing that. And I don't see where that would be good for you to spend 4 hours to lay out something like that. All right, so again, they go through a bunch of this, flex, shrink, etc. So you can see all of it in here. All right, and again, it's not my intention to sit there and read to you, but it's important that you at least page through, all right, that you at least page through the chapter. And as mentioned previously, it would probably be in your best interest to go out and look through that article that I mentioned to you that's under CSS tricks. All right. All right. You can change the order of flex items. So the chapter pretty much ends with talking about a responsive web page that uses Flexbox. All right. So when you look here, again, look at how this has changed. The bigger one that you see right there is what you would see if you looked at it on a desktop or a laptop. The smaller one that's here is probably what you'd see if you looked at it, for example, on a tablet. It still has all of the information, but look how it's changed. First thing is, you've taken the aside, and instead of it being on the right, it's now on top. And then underneath it, you have the stuff that you were shown before. All right. And notice here, there's no floating. All right. Or there's little floating or whatever. But here, it's right there. What's 75 million years old? Right there. All right. So we've changed the look and feel. All right. And you've changed the look and feel depending upon the type of media somebody is using to view the site. All right. And after a while, this is probably one of my least favorite chapters to lecture on because it sounds like a broken record. It's like you keep saying the same thing. It's because that's what it is. So they give you the HTML in here for it. It's not really very different from what we've seen before. All right. It says the UL element for the menu bar will be implemented as a flexbox that contains the LIs as flex items. All right. The main element will be implemented as a flexbox. It doesn't look different in here, but it will look different when you get into the CSS. All right. So what they end up doing is rewriting a lot of the stuff they've done without Flexbox, and they rewrite it using Flexbox. All right. Now, I'm going to quickly go through this, but this is what we're going to cover when we backtrack and go to Chapter 8, just so you see these. All right? What you see right here, and again, you probably have never seen them before, these are referred to as media queries. So what happens is the system is smart enough to figure out how wide the screen size is. All right? So if the screen size is anywhere between basically 0, which wouldn't make any sense, up to 767 pixels, all this stuff will be into play. 767 is a size typically for about the biggest width that you're going to find for a mobile device. All right, a tablet, you know, an iPad or whatever. So as it says, in the mobile layouts, the Flexbox in this case is used for the header, and the 3 flex items it contains are centered in a column. All right. In mobile layouts, the article and the aside are in a column, and their order is reversed. I already showed you that. All right. So again, if you want to learn more about this and you want it to make sense, I would strongly suggest that you look at the exercise. No, you're not going to be assigned these. All right, and no one's asked this, but gee, Jeff, why don't you guys assign this stuff at the end of the book, of the chapter? Because they give you the answers for all these. If you go out to Muroc.com and you do their download, it gives you all the answers. All right. What we will do is we will look at this in terms of, all right, we will look at this in terms of how we're going to use it with the shape up in chapters 9 and 10. All right. All right. It's a little bit early. It's 8:47, but let's come back at 9 o'clock. You all have a Monday look on your faces. All right. So 13 minutes, please.